Hey everyone. Today's show is actually kind of a follow-up response to my 18th episode, and it was called Is Rock and Roll Really Dead? Today's guest name is Lance Ingram, and he hosts a podcast called Yesterday's Concert. He's an amazing storyteller, and he has a real knack for crafting words in a way that describes exactly how he feels about the music that he loves. As I listened to his podcast, I couldn't help but wonder, what does somebody who loves music as much as he does consider to be the best music from recent times? So I asked him to create a segment for this show and share his favorite 5 songs from the last 5 years. I think that Lance's recommendations come from the perspective of somebody who lives and breathes live music. And I believe that 4 of the 5 songs which he recommends in this episode are songs that he fell in love with in a live performance setting. And as you listen, I think that you can kind of imagine what those songs would be like to hear in a live environment. I specifically enjoy his final pick for that very reason. As I listened to the song, I imagined myself hearing it at a live music venue and having a couple of beers and just kind of being entranced by this mad musical experience. Lance did an amazing job, as I expected he would, of providing a different perspective. And after he talks, I will do a short little recap of his favorite picks, just in case you want to listen to them at the end. And I'll try to do it in a manner where you can just kind of push pause, play the song, then come back and listen to the next one. All right, take it away, Lance.
Hey, Caesar, thanks for having me on the show. Very excited to share my top 5 songs from the last 5 years. This is an exciting topic for me too, and something I spend entirely too much time thinking about. So much so that I started a podcast about it. The very basic premise of my show is about music that resonates with us. And for music fanatics, that can be life-defining moments. As you mentioned, those guys at the waterfall, they'll forever have that memory of those songs attached to that day. It's so cliche, but it has to be said. Music is quite literally the soundtrack of our lives. But perhaps where our perspectives deviates, I believe there's beauty to every song. At its core, music is art, and art is subjective. John Mayer had a great quote about how music fans struggle to understand all types of music. We essentially force ourselves to like music that, in reality, we don't like. Maybe that's for posturing or gatekeeping's sake, but regardless, I think there's a place to admit that we don't understand a song or a genre, and most importantly, to be okay with it. We can appreciate the work of the artist and the impact it makes on a certain listener, but our role as music fanatics isn't to dictate what is or isn't good, but to find beauty in the art. One more thing I want to address before I get to my list is your comments about the diminished role of DJs in music spheres. I agree their role as cultural tastemakers is no longer valued, but I think we've seen a rise in new tastemakers through influencers. Now the term influencers carries a negative connotation, but with the cultural decentralization of the internet, we're better able to define our taste. My favorite influencer is a rock critic and author named Stephen Hayden. He has more than 50,000 Twitter followers, and I've come to realize that anytime he makes an album recommendation, I might as well just go ahead and listen to it, because I'm going to love it. Then there's also other corners of the internet like Reddit. I love psychedelic rock, and there's a great psych rock sub that's turned me on to a lot of bands I would have otherwise missed. All in all, what I'm saying is the lack of central tastemakers is a great thing. We've seen an explosion of niche genres in the last decade because of the internet. People have been able to discover music that better speaks to their life's journey and specific interest. Now to your point about finding said music, I firmly believe that's the responsibility of the listener. I have a handful of influencers whose opinions I respect. Plus, I allow the Spotify algorithm to work for me. Sure, it's the corporate overlords, but ultimately they want me to spend more time in the app, which means based on what I listen, they're going to serve me more engaging artists. Now that I've rambled long enough, here's my top 5 from the last 5. Just a brief note on my approach. Rather than allowing myself to fall into recency bias, I decided to select one song from each of the last 5 years, including 2022. And there's a specific reason why I wanted to include this year, but I'll explain that later. So without any further ado, let's get going. So my pick for 2018 is Casey Musgrave's Slow Burn. I want to be very straightforward about something. I don't believe there are many perfect albums, and why should there be? Perfect is by definition a near impossibility, so there shouldn't be a lot of it. One of the only albums I've ever considered to be perfect is Big Star's #1 record. Okay, so that said, I first heard Slow Burn covered by another artist. I was at a concert for a band that I've seen something around 30 times. It's safe to say that I know their discography backward and forwards. In the encore, they begin with this really quiet song. I listened intently trying to figure out what it was, but the crowd knew every word and sang along like it was one of their biggest hits. I scribbled down some of the lyrics on my phone and looked them up after the show. When I got home, I listened to Slow Burn by Casey and was astounded by the beauty and the poetics. The song is so innocent and intimate. I was instantly drawn into it. I had to hear the rest of the album. And after one listen to Golden Hour, I was a firm believer that I had just listened to an instant classic. Meanwhile, I'm completely oblivious that this album is huge and I've been living under a rock. I listened to Golden Hour on repeat for weeks. I couldn't get enough. It was on par with Fleetwood Mac's Rumors or the Eagles' Hotel California. Yeah, classic rock stands, I said it. Come at me. This was one of those albums that was so close to perfect. I was obsessed with it and had to see it live. I won't go through all the details of seeing it in concert as I did an entire episode on my podcast about it. But when I saw her at the Ryman Auditorium a few months later, she opened with the song, and to hear a room full of fans singing along, well, it was just one of those memories that you never forget. So my 2019 pick is Sturgill Simpson's Best Clockmaker on Mars. Sturgill's one of those artists that's really captured mystique and keeps his artist story interesting. He has a non-traditional rise to fame. He's publicly demonstrated a complete disregard for the music industry as an artist who plays by his own rules. He goes into an interview and says one thing only to turn around in the very next interview and contradict himself. I once told a buddy that Sturgill is the kind of guy to be in the middle of a wildly successful tour, call it quits, and never return to the spotlight. One day I fully expect Sturgill just to disappear from the public conscious and to never be heard from again. I selected Best Clockmaker on Mars because it's my favorite Sturgill song from my favorite Sturgill album. The media surrounding Sound and Fury was fascinating. Sturgill came out very publicly talking about how he didn't like the album, didn't want to do the massive arena tour to support it, and was ready to move on. He recorded the album years before and was sitting on it to give his label a giant middle finger. Plus, it was a huge departure for him artistically. Sturgill was a country artist, and this is anything but a country album. It's a guitar rock album. As mentioned, I was smitten by this album. When he announced his tour, I purchased tickets to 4 shows, including the tour opener in Birmingham, Alabama. So it's February 2020 and I'm in this arena with all these dudes wearing cowboy hats and oversized belt buckles. I heard multiple people say they hope he plays the old country stuff and none of that rock and roll from his new album. Sturgill opened the show by playing Sound and Fury front to back. The disappointment was so incredible. The guitar was so loud and the band was rocking. I have to imagine it was like seeing Bad Company in the late 70s. The crowd hated it, and by the time he finished Sound and Fury, half the crowd had left the show already. But despite all that, that wasn't the memory of what made me select this song. That show was my final proper concert in 2020 before the national shutdown. The tour only made it about 12 stops before being called off. Sturgill has publicly expressed gratitude for that tour being canceled and how he's grateful to move on from those songs, as I believe they represent a dark period in his life. That show is a limited experience that will likely never happen in that capacity again. So my pick for 2020 is Phoebe Bridgers' Graceland 2. While I think Punisher is an amazing album, perhaps even my all-time favorite, I don't think it could have been released at a more perfect time in history. With the almost daily disappointment of canceled shows, coupled with the horror that dominated the media, I was searching for anything to subsidize the terror. Punisher may seem like an odd choice to fill the gap given the sad nature of the songs, but as the theme of this prompt, it's the memories attached. During the summer of 2020, I would wake up before the sun to begin work from home, and around 2 in the afternoon, I'd take a break by going on these long bike rides through my neighborhood. Every ride, this was the album that I found my way back to. It's not exactly the chugging rhythm you'd expect to support the strenuous exercise, but I found so much peace in those rides. It became a safety net for me. Even though I'm not much of a lyrics guy, I pored over them for this album. I realized that our lyrics may seem sad on the surface, but there's so much more depth to them. There's even a lot of dark humor if you listen closely. And dark humor is very much needed that summer. I chose this specific song because I visited the site where this song is named after. Graceland 2 is a home in a nowhere town in northeast Mississippi. It was about an hour north of where I attended college. It was a rite of passage to visit for a tour in the late hours of the night. The owner was this unstable gentleman who had an unhealthy obsession with Elvis Presley. You paid him either something like $10 or a case of Coca-Cola, and he'd take you on a tour of his home. which is basically just a hoarder's nest of Presley memorabilia. It was an odd sight, one that was compounded by the fact that he was not shy to let you know he was packing heat. It shouldn't take much math to figure out why this song resonated with me during that period. It was a memory of a better time. Unlike all the other songs I've selected, I don't have a story about seeing Phoebe Bridgers live. Yet. I had a ticket to see her in 2021, but plans fell through. And honestly, I'm not sure if I can go through with it. The memory of that album and that summer is such a perfect space. I don't know if I want to risk tampering with it. So my pick for 2021 is The War on Drugs, Harmonious Dream. One thing I also spend way too much time thinking about is musical comprehension. On more than one occasion I've listened to an album, and while I appreciated the art, it didn't click. I could enjoy the songs, but I didn't get what all the hubbub was about. However, sometimes I overlook stuff, so I'll go see the band live to give the album its due. Typically what happens is the songs translate live for me, and then I can go back to the studio album with a newfound appreciation for the artist. There have been several bands that this applies to, including most notably Wilco. The War on Drugs is another one. They were a recommendation from Stephen Hyden, and after hearing him talk them up for several years, I decided to give them a chance. While I enjoyed their music, I didn't get what was so great about them. It felt like another rock band leaning into the odd fascination with 80s production. I was finally able to see The War on Drugs at the Ryman in 2022, and that show moved them into my top 3 favorite bands. The songs took on new life. I understood the production choices and how these songs are so much better live. Harmonious Dream was an absolute force to be reckoned with. The song was nearly doubled in length and features a monster guitar solo. It was one of the standouts from the show. Since then, I've been able to go back and learn to love and appreciate not only the I Don't Live Here Anymore album, but also The War on Drugs. As I said, they're one of my favorite bands now. I've completely reorganized my concert calendar to see them as many times as possible. And while I may not agree with every recommendation, this experience taught me to listen to the influencers I've selected. For people like Stephen Hyden, they don't amass a significant following for pushing uninteresting artists. I guess in a way, this selection is a signifier for finding the voices that you can trust and appreciate. You may not always agree with their take, but gaining insight from varying points of authority is profoundly important to expanding our musical taste. So here it is, the reason I wanted to include 2022. My pick for 2022 is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, The Dripping Tap. King Gizzard is my favorite band. This is a development that took years and was something cemented in me long before I realized it. They are without a doubt, in my mind at least, the most fascinating band, not only on the scene, but perhaps in music history. I know, that's a lofty statement. There are virtually no other artists that have a significant output that these guys are doing every year. But not only that, the variety of output. Although at their core they're a psych rock band, they've incorporated thrash metal, microtonal, synth pop, jazz, blues, garage rock, and more. In 2017 alone, they released 5 studio albums. 5. That's only one less album than Radiohead has released since 2000. Sure, you can call into question the quality of these albums, but I think you'd be remiss to find any gizhead that would discount these releases. So this takes us to 2022, the release of Omnium Gatherum, which is essentially an outtakes album. However, it might be among their best. The first single release was The Dripping Tap, an 18-minute magnus opus. Yeah, I'm going to go out there and say it's the best song they've released to date. Granted, with their output levels, that may change by the end of the month. So the song is composed of multiple sections and defies your standard 3 to 4 minute hit and keeps the listener engaged from start to finish. You could adequately say it takes you on a composed ride. After hearing it for the first time, I set it on repeat and listened to it 5 or 6 times. That many listens isn't much when your favorite band releases a new song, but remember, it's 18 minutes long. We're talking about 90 minutes of the same song. I was able to finally see the band at Bonnaroo this year, and they closed their set with the song. It was a very expected move by almost every fan, but it exceeded everyone's expectations. About 90 seconds into the song is an upbeat section that sent the crowd into a full rage. A 30-foot circle pit opened up and people stormed from the back to participate. Everyone surrounding watched and danced in joy. Even all of my 800-plus concerts, that was one of the most memorable things I've ever witnessed. I've rambled enough about the songs that made me over the last 5 years. I appreciate the opportunity, Caesar, and look forward to hearing what others think. If you have feedback for my picks, hit me up on Twitter @ConcertPod. And make sure you tag the Great Big Intergalactic too.
Once again, I'd like to thank Lance. It was exactly what I was hoping for when I reached out to him. His podcast is called Yesterday's Concert. You can find it at yesterdaysconcert.com or check him out on Twitter @ConcertPod. All right, as promised, I said I would do a recap at the end, and so I'm going to go back through those songs. The first one was Casey Musgrave's Slow Burn. And the second one was Sturgill Simpson, Best Clockmaker on Mars. The third one was Phoebe Bridgers, Graceland 2, and that's TOO. The fourth one was the band The War on Drugs, and the song's name is Harmonious Dream, HARMONIA, ''S. You know, I'll put links to this on my Facebook too, at the Great Big Intergalactic. And the final one, the 18-minute long song, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, and the song's name was The Dripping Tap. This has been the Great Big Intergalactic. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. The Great Big Intergalactic can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that podcasts can be heard. If social media is your thing, you can follow the program on Facebook or Twitter. If you enjoy the show, upvote, share, like, and subscribe. Whenever and wherever those things can be done. If you'd like to send feedback, the easiest way to do that is to email the show at tgbiuniverse@gmail.com, TGBI as in the Great Big Intergalactic, or you can leave a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Contributions could include written feedback, audio submissions, voicemails, or potentially even live guests. It was great having you today, and see you next time.